Nigeria is number one on earth for stablecoin adoption. This technology is not the future. It is very much happening right now on the continent, especially in Nigeria. There's a lot of risk to it if you don't know the person properly. Stablecoins are the first technology that come in and actually solve that problem. Within the next 10 years, nobody's going to be making a payment on Swift. They're going to be using USDT, USDC, other stablecoins.
Hello, everyone listening in. Welcome to the New Money Podcast, the show where we talk about crypto and hopefully find out how exactly the future of money looks like. As usual, we've got the Lydian lion behind me, which is the oldest coin in the world. And with me today, I have a guest who's working on the frontier of this industry. Chris, I made you wear the headphones. The audio is great. So thank you very much for joining us on the show today.
It's good to be here. Wouldn't miss it.
Amazing. Hey, I'll briefly introduce you, even though I think for many of our listeners, you guys need no introduction. I mean, Yellow Card is essentially Africa's leading stablecoin payments infrastructure provider, probably Africa's leading exchange. You guys launched in 2019. You raised over 80 million from investors like Blockchain Capital, Polychain, shared investor friends at Valar. And you kind of scaled the business from a Bitcoin remittance idea into a Pan-African Fintech powerhouse. You are at the forefront of the stablecoin revolution, especially kind of unfolding the story of the global south. And we want to chat about the Yellow Card journey. We want to chat about regulation, building a regulated business in Africa, and the future of stablecoins and traveling the world. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Ready to party, brother.
Ready to party. So Chris, we've talked to a couple of people who were on this journey from essentially day one with you, and they tell us your story starts at Taco Bell. What do they mean?
They are referring to, the really early days. So, I mean, long story short, right, I got into Bitcoin back in 2013. So it was in quite early. My co-founder is the guy who would walk around college parties evangelizing the gospel of Bitcoin, right? He's a real tall guy. He's like very sweaty. And he would just walk around parties, arms spread wide, sermon on the mounting Bitcoin. And got me in about 2013. By 2015, I fell fully down the rabbit hole, right? And I was like, this is the best thing ever. This is what I'm doing with the rest of my life. And we tried a number of things. None of them really worked. Most of them were hilarious, including selling Bitcoin out of various Taco Bells in the greater United States. And in the midst of doing all of that, we landed on we were going to put a gift card in CVS, Walmart, places like that. You'd be able to walk in, buy this gift card and redeem it for Bitcoin. Started building that out. And then, one day met this Nigerian man, Wells Fargo, in Auburn, Alabama, of all places, who was sending $200 to his family. And the bank charged him $90 to send $200. And I thought, that seems crazy, right? So I talked to the guy. Hey, have you heard of Bitcoin? It's free, it's instant, it's fun, all this great stuff. Went home and basically started thinking, well, what would this guy's mom do with $200 of Bitcoin, right? Like everybody in this industry loves to talk about all the problems that are being solved, but then, what does this actually do for a real person? And I don't know. I sort of became obsessed with this problem, right? I went home and started thinking, how is this possible, right? What can be done about this? How does Bitcoin, how does, the broader blockchain ecosystem solve this? I don't think I knew where Nigeria was on a map at the time, which, look, they don't teach you nearly as much about Africa as you might expect in the Louisiana education system. I know that might be hard to hear for some people out there, but, basically, just started trying to learn everything that I could, right? I wanted to understand everything that I could about, the country and the continent and the currency and the banking system. And, I started doing all this research and realized if I want to understand Nigeria, I need to speak to somebody from there. And so I put out an ad online that said, looking to speak to Nigerian men, which, in hindsight, probably could have been worded better. I got exactly what I needed. And this was about the point in my life where I learned that Nigerians are the most convincing people on the face of this planet. Because within about a month and a half of meeting this Nigerian man on the internet, he'd convinced me to go get a passport and take the first international flight of my life. I'd been on a plane 4 times in my life before starting the company, and then landed in Lagos, Nigeria on a 6-day-old passport, no visa, no shots, and a one-way ticket that I spent all of our money. So that's yeah, I mean, sort of, ended up, I mean, look, Taco Bell is hilarious, right? I think it's even funnier that we ended up in Lagos, Nigeria afterwards. But
No, but you guys grew up fast. So many follow-up questions, but I think kind of like double clicking on the, hey, you don't know nearly as much about Africa as folks should know after they've attended kind of like any American school. Like, what were the kind of like top three most surprising things that you learned, kind of like actually hitting the ground and being there?
man, I don't know. Top three is tough. I think, look, what I would say is the most, yeah, the overall most sort of eye-opening thing for me about the continent, again, knowing essentially nothing about it going in, is the sheer diversity. I think that Africa often gets talked about as sort of a monolith, right? And you hear about Africa as as a whole. Right. And, the reality is that like Nigeria and Botswana have about as much in common as, Germany and China. Right. It's just totally different cultures, people, I mean, food, everything. Right. And yeah, I mean, like experiencing that diversity firsthand for me was quite eye opening. Right. Because it's just not something that you hear about. Right. You hear about, look, and you grow up sort of learning about, different parts of Europe and things like that, especially in the context of history, wars and all this. But like, you just don't learn much about the continent, right? You don't learn much about the different pieces of the continent or anything like that. And so, yeah, I think that for me was one of the most sort of eye-opening.
And so initially when you traveled there, you spent most time in Nigeria, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So ended up in Nigeria. I mean, took about a year and a half before I could afford a plane ticket to South Africa and sort of keep things going from there.
No, and kind of like what made Nigeria special in terms of also building out the business and in terms of characteristics of kind of like that nation specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think what makes Nigeria special. It's a country that has a lot of problems, right? And there's a lot of things that still need to be improved on the ground in terms of infrastructure, a number of other things. What makes the country special really is a young population of tech-savvy hustlers. Like, there's a reason that, Nigerians have the reputation they have, right? Like people are ready to hustle. They're working. They're trying to make it happen, right? In whatever way possible. And so, I mean, the most special thing for sure about the country, and I mean, also the continent more broadly, but like especially Nigeria. Right. It's just, there's a reason why you have so many tech companies and startups and, everything else popping up out of Nigeria specifically. And it's because like the culture and the people and the attitude is just so different, right? Like people are just hustling.
So you say you're kind of helping these businesses moving money better, you're helping these businesses store money better, access to dollar rates. Maybe let's start with the moving money part. Talk to me a bit about kind of like the use cases. What kind of customers are those? Are these fintechs? Are these banks? Are these enterprises? And essentially, what was the status quo before you guys and the broader stablecoin movement came in?
Yeah, I mean, so, the thing is everybody operating across, the African continent, very difficult to make international payments. It's very difficult to be able to access liquidity on dollars and hard currency. And all of that leads to a situation where it can be challenging to, continue to operate a business, right? Continue to invest, continue to grow, anything like that. And you've seen this over the last couple of years, right? You've seen companies like Johnson & Johnson have to leave various countries. You've seen, a number of other large multinationals that have had issues, across various parts of the emerging world. But I think what really surprises people sometimes is that it's not, this is not like a fintech problem. This is not like a, mom and pop store problem. This is an everybody problem. I mean, we work with everybody from some of the largest banks on the continent all the way to, again, like a guy that sells shoes on the side of the road and everybody in between. We work with, some of the largest food companies, some of the largest pharmaceutical companies. We work with, importers, exporters, oil and gas. You name it, right? Everybody has the same problem if they're operating in these parts of the world. There's nobody that's really exempt from these issues and from dealing with, currency and payment problems. And I think you asked, sort of what happened before. I mean, what we compete with and replace is essentially the informal market. The thing is it's not like Swift and, international payments through the banking system worked before this. We're competing against essentially like Hawala, if you're familiar with Hawala. Hawala is it's like a concept of money movement, right? It's like, hey, I know you and you have an uncle in, Kenya. So I'm going to give you, $1,000. And then your uncle is going to give my guy $1,000 in Kenya, and then you and your uncle are going to sort each other out however you do. And, look, Hawala networks are pretty powerful, and in some countries can move, millions and millions of dollars. But it's informal networks. It's informal ways of moving money that just aren't as effective, and there's a lot of risk to it. If you don't know the person properly, there's bound to be problems. And so I think stablecoins are the first technology that come in and actually solve that problem, as opposed to just sort of moving the problem around to somebody else.
So this might be a stupid question, but let's say I guess okay, these informal networks, how you guys are better, I think that's very clear. So let's look at a couple of the more scaled kind of use cases that might have had access to Swift through their bank before, but the Swift just wasn't able to provide the liquidity on the routes that are needed, right? And I think you mentioned this, but I think kind of US dollar liquidity is very scarce in these markets, right? And it's this kind of very scarce asset. And I think now this stupid question, the first principles question is what makes you better in providing that liquidity, right? But because in the end, you also need to provide some sort of US dollar liquidity to kind of facilitate the on-ramp into the US dollar rail. And so I think how do you guys do that? How do you guys source that? And why are you better than, let's say, a local bank with Swift?
Yeah. So, liquidity is a few things, right? It's not just having the dollars. It's also having the dollars where they're needed at the time that they are needed, right? In that, look, I don't know, if you needed, $1 million and you needed to make a payment of $1 million. Well, that's great. If I have the $1 million and you come to me to make the payment, then we're sorted, right? I have the $1 million and we're ready to go. If you need $1 million and, that $1 million is sitting with somebody else, well, then you have to go find that guy, right? So there's still no liquidity for you, right? And that's sort of a very simplistic way of explaining how the banking system in a lot of these places work, right? In that, liquidity is going to vary by banks. Certain banks are going to be more liquid than others. There's going to be more dollars sitting at, a major bank than there is at, some of these smaller banks, and sometimes vice versa, right? And it totally depends. It can be completely random. It just depends on, which ones got lucky and which ones received dollars that day. And the thing is, for a large company, right, take like a Coca-Cola or anybody else, either they need to have an account with every bank in the country to ensure that, whenever they need dollars, that, they have the highest likelihood of being able to obtain those dollars. Or, now with stablecoins, because that money exists outside of the banking system, you can sort of centralize that liquidity, right? So instead of, does this bank have the money? Does that bank have the money? Do I have to go to 4 different banks to be able to find the money? You can actually centralize that liquidity with stablecoins, right? The other thing that it does is it provides a lot more transparency as to what happens with those dollars. The other problem with having those dollars excuse me. The other problem with having those dollars in various banks is look, banks are like black boxes, right? Nobody really knows, what happens to your money on the other side of that bank. And, with stablecoins, there's a lot more transparency. And so it's a lot harder for corruption and other things to take place that sort of direct the dollars into places that they shouldn't necessarily go. When it's happening through stablecoins, it's all transparent. It's all on a ledger. Everybody can see what's happening, where it's going, etc. So it's a combination of sort of centralizing that liquidity, and then providing some transparency to the process.
If you look at this kind of like ability to centralize liquidity, and I think that actually makes a bunch of sense, right? And I've always wondered on like what is the logical explanation that liquidity works so much better through stablecoins than through banks. I think centralization is kind of like the key headline. Who are your key liquidity providers? What are the key partnerships? I'd love to briefly talk about how you interact with the exchanges, with the issuers, and who do you consider like the key stakeholders in that yellow card world?
Yeah. I mean, and look, to your point, it's the centralization. It's also, I mean, it's also the decentralization of that liquidity, right? In that the liquidity is no longer centralized with banks or with one specific bank or a couple of specific banks. That that liquidity just exists on chain. It's completely decentralized, completely open. Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of market makers and liquidity providers and all of that, we do all of that. We do all of that in house. We're one of the largest market makers. Period. Right. Never mind stablecoins. We're one of the largest market makers. Period. In the majority of these countries that we operate in, and it happened completely by necessity. Right. The thing is that there are no market makers. There are no liquidity providers in the vast majority of regions that we operate. And, in these countries, what are you going to do if you want to operate there? There's no liquidity providers. There's no alternatives for us. There's nobody that we can go to, how do you say, just, dump local currency off to. Well, you have to do it yourself, right? And so, we ended up developing all of those muscles in-house. We do full market making, I mean, full sort of liquidity provision, and we have a whole team that handles that, everything from rate setting to treasury management and so on and so forth, right? And I think the beauty of doing both, right? Because most companies in the space are not doing both, right? They're doing one or the other. They're sort of providing that interface for businesses and consumers, or they are, on the back end providing liquidity and things like that. And the beauty of doing both, I think, is that it puts us in really a unique position to be able to help serve these businesses, right? Because we understand what's going on in the market. We understand, what they need, what they're looking for. We understand, how these currency rates are moving. We understand, just all of these various different issues that go on in these markets with currencies that all fall into the exotic category from an FX standpoint, right? Where, there's very little liquidity, the spreads are high, the rates are bouncing around constantly. And so, I think, it makes us a better partner to the businesses that we work with, because we're able to, sort of talk them through, their specific problems, right? If you have, you have several $1 million that's in a country and you need to, move it to another country, you need to, facilitate a payment, anything like that. We can tell you when the best time to do that is going to be. We can, advise, or well, not advise, but, we can, help point you in the right direction from a rate standpoint, and make sure that you understand when is the right time to move this.
I think it's really interesting, and if we kind of double click on this idea of like, hey, there are these two parts to your business, right? There's kind of like interfacing with the customer, and then there's a kind of like liquidity under the hood, treasury management part. And isn't there like a third part, which is basically access to the fiat rails, right? Access to the local and international fiat rails, and kind of like the regulatory overhead and complexity that comes with that, which kind of makes all of this valuable. And I think if yes, I think what I'd love to get your point of view on is like, what is the hardest part, right? What is the hardest part to this business in your opinion, and kind of like also the most valuable one if you think about the company?
The hardest part, I mean, Look, with the with the places on Earth that we're doing business, none of it is necessarily easy, right? So, I think they all have their challenges. But yeah, I mean, so to your point, we have two main products, right? So we have our treasury portal, which is essentially what we've been talking about, right? And that's where businesses come on. They want to, make a payment. They need to settle an invoice. They need to, do, move money in, move money out, anything like that, right? And so they're able to, use local currency to buy USDT, USDC, et cetera, right? Make that invoice payment, settle those payments, et cetera. And vice versa, right? They need to, move money into the country. They're able to liquidate USDT, USDC, RLUSD, PYUSD, et cetera, move that money in and go from there. And then the second main product that we have is our payments API, which I like to call Africa as a service, but that abbreviates to ASS, and so the team doesn't let me call it that. But essentially what that does is that takes the banking and mobile money rails that we have across the continent and now across the broader emerging world, abstracts those and makes it available to businesses that want to operate in some of the fastest growing markets on earth, the fastest growing middle classes, fastest growing consumer classes, fastest growing GDPs, but don't want to deal with the complexities of operating in those markets, right? They don't want to deal with the regulation, compliance, licensing, banking, currencies that inflate 100% a year, anything like that. And so, yeah, I think essentially the hardest part of all of it is, we're taking systems that are set up. Let me rephrase that. We're taking systems that are not set up for, the digital age, and trying to abstract all of these issues away for some of these larger companies, right? For PayPal and Coinbase and a number of these other guys that we work with. And so, I mean, look, we deal with banks in certain countries that don't have online banking, never mind, an API that you can seamlessly plug into. And all of that needs to be seamless through our interface, right? If a company is coming to us and wants to work with us and needs to use our rails, that they don't want to deal with the fact that payments in certain countries have to be signed off by a branch manager, right? That's not, they don't want to have to deal with any of that, right? They don't want to have to deal with, again, the lack of interfaces. They don't want to deal with the fact that, in some countries, banking system or like banks will just go down for a day or two at a time. They don't want to deal with any of that. And so I think, the most difficult thing for us, not necessarily like actively the most difficult thing, but certainly historically the most difficult thing was, building all of that into our system, right? Accounting for all of these nuances, complexities that vary country by country, and, making sure that no matter who it is that's coming to us, they don't have to experience any of that. They're going to get, a Stripe quality payments API that they can plug into, make these payments with, essentially, 99 to 100% completion rate, and go from there, right? And that's all these guys care about. And so that's what we have to be able to provide.
Yeah, so I think there are like two levels to that complexity which you guys are abstracting, right? There's kind of like this whole like payment ops, technical, operational complexity. Like, hey, this bank needs an approval. Like, they don't have an online, they don't have APIs, all of these things that you make easier for businesses to interface with. And then obviously there's now like kind of like an emerging regulatory complexity, right? We've got licensing in Botswana, we've got licensing in South Africa. I think a bunch of countries have launched sandboxing. And so there's this whole kind of like regulated landscape coming up. And I'd love to kind of like get your point of view on this, but maybe coming in from a very macro perspective. How do governments, administrations, authorities think about all of this? I think there's like this really interesting trade-off where on the one hand, it's good because it opens up trade for local businesses, right? It opens up access and financial inclusion. On the other hand, it's bad because you kind of lose oversight, right? You lose kind of like these rails that you previously controlled, lose some sort of control over these financial rails. What has been your experience from kind of like a very macro point of view? Is this regarded as something that's good for the individual economies, or something that's dangerous?
I think the thing is that the like we were talking about, right? In terms of what did people do before, they were working through informal systems before, and so it's not that the government in most of these cases is actually losing oversight. They're actually they're actually gaining significantly more oversight by bringing this stuff on chain, right? All these governments, all the law enforcement, agencies and FIUs and FICs and everything that we work with across the continent, a lot of these guys are already working with Chainalysis, right? They're already working with Elliptic. They're already working with, these various, blockchain monitoring programs and software. So, these guys are already well aware and well equipped to be able to actually monitor this technology, as opposed to, the informal market, which there is just no way to monitor. Right. If I give you money to, get your uncle to give my friend money, there's no way to monitor that. Right. And so it's a little bit, it's a step in the right direction. And I think that, the benefits of opening the economy up, right, enabling businesses locally to be able to invest more, to grow more, to hire more, to, import, all of that, far outweighs the downside of, any other, potential issues, right? And these governments see this, which is why they've moved to regulate the space in such a heavy way, and not just regulate, but actually encourage the industry to set up locally. Right, encourage companies to come in, encourage people to get involved in the sector. And you've seen this across the continent, to your point, right? You have, licensing regimes in Botswana, South Africa, Nigeria, Namibia, Mauritius. You have sandboxing in Zambia, Rwanda, Ghana, Uganda, Tanzania, etc. And, more and more, right? And we have, we've been able to register for, formal reporting and formal, monitoring and things like that in a number of countries as well. And so, I think, overall, you've seen just a huge step in the right direction over the past several years. What I tell everybody is that before November, there was no better place on earth to be running a stablecoin company than the continent, because you have the most access to the most regulators that are willing to work with you, that are willing to engage, that are willing to, to talk through it, to work through the space, et cetera. Obviously, things are changing rapidly in the U.S., and so, we'll see if, we'll see how that sort of maintains. But certainly pre-November, there was just no better place to actually be working with the governments and engaged on this technology.
If you had to give one shout out to a regulator that's specifically crypto forward, which one would you point to?
What I would say is I think that Nigeria gets a bad rap because of everything that has happened recently there. And I'm not going to comment on, any of the stuff that has happened recently. What I will say is that it should not be, it is not locally reflective of, and it should not be perceived as a reflection on the industry as a whole, as opposed to specific issues with, specific businesses. And so, I think that overall the government there, and, the SEC has been a lot more friendly towards the space and a lot more sort of open towards the space than it necessarily gets credit for. The SEC has done, a lot of work pushing through regulation. I mean, there was even, a bill that President Tinubu recently signed that, again, just, is pushing the space in the right direction, right? Classifies crypto and classifies digital assets as securities and classifies certain ones as securities and sort of formalizes the or sorry, not securities, commodities, and classifies them, classifies them under the Securities and Exchange Commission, and yeah, I think overall, like we've seen a lot of work from the SEC in Nigeria on regulating the space, on trying to open up that licensing regime, provide that clarity, things like that. And now that this bill has been signed by the president, I think that they'll be able to move a lot more quickly towards really formally regulating the space. And the reason why that's important is Nigeria is number one on earth for stablecoin adoption. It's number two overall for crypto adoption, right? This is a market where this stuff is happening actively, right? It's not, I think, people like to talk about how, this technology is the future. This technology is not the future. It is very much happening right now on the continent, especially in Nigeria. And so, yeah, I think, the work that the SEC has done is important to make sure that, the country maintains a safe and healthy relationship with the industry, and the industry is able to continue to grow and thrive there.
I love this thought, right? Like if stablecoins are not the future, but really the present in markets like Nigeria, what is the future, right? Like, is it just more of the same, right? Like more regulation, better regulation, more liquidity, all of these things just driving that way further down the road? Or do you anticipate a step change development happening over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of like the global rollout of stablecoins as the money of the internet age? Like, do you think there's this inflection point still ahead of us, or are we just on the right path and need to execute as an ecosystem?
Yeah, I think the future is banks and major payments businesses really all hitting that infrastructure inversion, right? So like stablecoins and this industry, digital assets, stablecoins especially, are the present. They also still are the future, in that there's a lot of work still that needs to be done by banks and by major old school payments companies to actually upgrade their infrastructure to this technology, right? And I think the best way to compare it to is like voice over internet, right? I mean, so like right now we're communicating through voice over internet, right? Whereas you go back, I mean, just a few decades, right? And everything happened through phone lines. And even the internet was, how do you say, you had dial up, and you had, all this, at least in the US, where, all that was happening through phone lines and phone wave frequencies and things like that. And, now everything has moved over to the internet, right? At first, like the phone companies refused, and they insisted that their technology was better, and that it was actually phone lines that would make all of this work and happen and possible and all that. And now every call today happens over the internet. Everybody that you call, it's going through the internet, right? It's not running through phone lines anymore. And I think that the same thing is going to have to happen with banks and stablecoins, right? Is for forever, banks and SWIFT have been the ones moving this money around the world and making payments and helping to facilitate all of this. And right now with stablecoins and with this technology, you have this infrastructure inversion coming, where within the next 10 years, nobody's going to be making a payment on SWIFT, right? Nobody's going to be making an international wire in 10 years. They're going to be using, USDT, USDC, other stable coins to facilitate that international leg, and then localize the money wherever it is that they need it, right? So if I need to send money to, Hong Kong, I'm not going to wire that money there anymore. I'm going to send, USDT, USDC, whatever. I'm going to send stable coins. And then it's going to be localized on the other side in the Hong Kong dollar. And, when banks start to actually upgrade their infrastructure and move away from Swift, that's when you've really started to hit the future, right? That's when, that's when it's really hitting its stride. That's when it's really happening. And yeah, I think, that's the piece that I'm most excited for, is, just seeing these banks actually start to become interested in this technology, which we've started to see now, especially with everything going on in the US. You've started to see banks actually looking into stablecoins, actually looking into digital assets. And so, yeah, I think, that's the big piece that, for me is, really exciting as sort of the future of this technology and industry.
If we circle back to what you said in the beginning, right? Like your flight to Nigeria, when you started the business, kind of like this being your first international flight ever. People have been telling us that by now you've basically been living out of a suitcase for quite some time, and you've been traveling the world. Why do you travel so much, and what was kind of like your favorite destination so far?
If you ain't living, you're dying, right? So it's you got to keep moving. No, I think look, the reality is that to operate and to run a business that operates across emerging markets, across Africa, across various other parts of the world. To do it right, you need to constantly be in and out of there, right? I mean, our whole mission and our whole focus is how do you bridge the emerging world and like these emerging markets to the US, to Europe, to East Asia, to these other parts of the world and more developed economies. And yeah, in order to do that, you have to be the bridge, right? So, in a sense, the reason I end up traveling so much is because I'm the one, trying to be that bridge, right? And the company is trying to be that bridge. And so, look, you can only have, one person at the company that's, able to maintain that crazy of a schedule because the other people have to get the work done, right? So, look, favorite place that I've ever been. That's a tough one. Cause look, we have employees in 21 countries, so I'm going to get in trouble if I start picking, favorites. I would say, what I will say is one place that everybody should go, because it is so incredibly unique. So I won't opine on what's my favorite, but I will say that one of the most unique places I've ever been on Earth is Ethiopia. It is the only country on the African continent that was never colonized, and grew up in essentially isolation only until, a few decades ago. And it is just super unique. I mean, the culture, the people, the music, the language, everything there is just, it's very unique. I highly recommend it. Addis Ababa is a phenomenal city. You have, some of the best history in that region with like Harar, Lalibela, all of that. So it is a place that I think everybody should visit at least once. Outside of that, I would say I gotta say Lagos, man. Like Lagos is it's one of those cities that also I think everybody should be required to visit once, right? And I think there's like this saying. I think it's a global saying. It's definitely an American saying that like if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. And I can assure you that is not true. If you can make it in Lagos, Nigeria, you can make it anywhere, right? That is the place to, put yourself to the test and see what you can do, right? That is, it's so, it's just so unique as well, right? It's chaotic, it's fun, it's like things work, things don't work. It's super unique. I mean, I tell everybody should be required to spend a week there.
No, but I like that, right? I've been leaning into the whole kind of like traveling to meet your customers type thing as well. I think it's such an asset to kind of be where your customers are. And if they're spread out, you gotta do it. Gotta do what you have to do. I'm doing a thing we call 30 days, 30 customers right now, where we're meeting our 30 biggest customers in person, right? And we're just going there, taking them out for lunch or dinner, and we're having a good time. And I do think it is worth the hustle. Thanks for bearing with me. We'll kind of like wrap it up with a couple of very short questions. Chris, if you had to be CEO of a different fintech, which one would that be? Please don't say Ivy, my man.
I don't think I would be CEO of a fintech company outside of like outside of what we're doing. Outside, if you made me go outside of crypto, I would go into like a different industry. I would not go into traditional.
Well, what industry would you go in?
But if I was forced to stop doing like digital assets and stablecoins, I would do something tangible. Because I think like working with like internet money all day, all of a sudden, like you just like, I don't know, I get like the urge. I want to like touch stuff, you know?
Yeah, you want to do some pottery, man. No, I like that.
Yeah,
what's something?
pottery.
Yeah, you want to do some play work. What's something you've changed your mind about on recently?
This is not like, I guess it depends how we define recently, right? But something that I have changed my mind on pretty drastically over the course of like the last several years is higher education. So like, look, I went to like a cow college in rural Alabama, right? Everybody knows Auburn now because of the Final Four. We're a basketball school, obviously. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. My take was always that you get the same education no matter where you go. It doesn't matter. And having seen my friends that went to Harvard, that went to, MIT, that went to Berkeley, that went to some of these like top tier schools, seeing the network that they came out of school with, and sort of how much easier it was for them to develop the network that they have now versus, what I went through and what, we went through in the early days, developing that network. I am going to make sure my kids go to Harvard.
No, I think that makes a bunch of sense. I mean, I dropped out of uni, so I can't, we got nothing.
Well, exactly, right? That's the thing is like the education doesn't matter. Like, and that's the piece that I didn't understand until recently is like the education actually doesn't matter. You can learn all this stuff on the internet. What you can't do is go party with like the guy who's going to end up, being CEO of, DoorDash or something, right?
No, I think that makes a bunch of sense. So one last one. What's the hardest truth about crypto that no one wants to admit? Bonus points if you give me hardest truth about stablecoins.
I mean, I think this applies to stablecoins as well, but like self-custody kind of sucks. Everybody in the industry loves to talk about self-custody. And, look, like I have self-custody. I still self-custody. Obviously people in the industry self-custody. But when it comes to mass adoption, which is what we should all be talking about, how do you get this technology in the hands of more people? How do you get more people adopting crypto, adopting digital assets, things like that? Self-custody sucks. Like it's not like self-custody is not mass market by any means, right? Like my mom will never self-custody. The average person does not want to be their own bank. The average person actually quite likes their bank because they know the teller and they've been, going there for 15 years and saying hi to Doris every time they go and like, withdrawing their cash and, whatever. Right. And so the thing is like, if you're going to replace that, you cannot replace that with a system where here's 12 words that if you forget it, all of your money is gone forever. Right. Like that's not appealing to any, like, I don't know when the last time people in this industry have like talked to somebody, just like a normal person on the streets, but that's not appealing. Like, so yeah, I think like self-custody is not great. There's a reason that custodial solutions are so popular. There's a reason that like companies like Coinbase are so popular. It's because people actually do prefer for somebody else to be responsible for this stuff and for them to not have to worry about it, right? Like I think that would be, I mean, that's like one of my hotter takes in the industry.
And I think that's decently hot. And I appreciate you for that, Chris. To kind of wrap it up, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. If you like the episode, to all the listeners out there, feel free to like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. We'll be back next week with another show. Chris, once again, thank you. This was so much fun, and see you soon.
Good to see you.